We're up here on top of Mount Marcy, just waiting for the sun to rise. Day 2 of the Northville Blasted Trail is in the books. Well, life doesn't get much better than this open ridge walk on Jay Mountain, and we're at the summit of Lower Wolfjaw, our 8th high peak of the day here on the Great Range Traverse. Well, it's 4:30 a.m., heading a big slide today, and it's -4 degrees here at the parking lot. Bushwhacking our way up Green Mountain, and I have to say, the trees are winning this fight today. Well, the sun is shining and the wind is whipping here up on Haystack. Next stop, Saddleback Cliffs. Cock-a-doodle-doo from the summit of Rooster Combe. Scarface might be the most underrated hike in the entire park. 60-mile-an-hour winds up on Hurricane. Very fitting, cruising up the Bald Rock slab here on Bald Mountain. Standing up here on the summit of Catamount Mountain, Iroquois, Mount Van Hovenberg, Skylight, Santanoni. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. Winter hiking is a magical experience when carrying the proper gear, wearing the right clothes, and out in the right conditions. And it blows a summer day out of the water, to be honest. But it requires even more attention to detail to make sure you're properly prepared. The mountains do not care about you, they do not care about your feelings, and they do not care about what you've accomplished in the past in the outdoors. If they are not respected, it could come with deadly consequences. So that is what we're here to avoid. So as this Winter Hiking 101 series rolls on, take the information to heart, be prepared so you can make the best decisions both before and during the hike. So let's get into part 2 of this 3-part Winter Hiking 101 series. In part 1, I discussed researching your hike, the clothing you should wear, and some equipment to have with you. Now let's talk about your backpack and everything that goes in it. For winter hiking specifically, and also just general hiking practices, but they're even more important in the winter. We're going to start with none other than your food and water. And if you're new to winter hiking, your water needs are quite different in the winter than they are in the summer. H2O. And I'll start off with a question. What happens to water when the temperature is below 32 degrees Fahrenheit? Yes, it freezes. Good, you shouted out. So when it comes to winter hiking, it's very likely that your water bottle will indeed freeze, leaving you with a hunk of ice inside your Nalgene bottle, thus rendering it pretty useless. And while that hunk of ice is fun to look at, it's heavy, it's clear, and it makes a great weapon or a paperweight, but it will not quench your thirst, sadly. So you'll have to take some precautions to keep your water from freezing, and I'm going to give you some tips in doing so in just a minute. But before I get to that, I want to mention how crucial it is to actually drink and hydrate when hiking. It seems like it's an obvious thing, but it's not. It's easy to forget to drink when you're winter hiking. You know, when you're in the summer months, you tend to sweat a lot. When we sweat, we end up just naturally wanting to drink water. You know, it's a no-brainer, really. But in the winter, and especially on cold days, and since we're wearing the proper clothing to regulate our body temperature so we're not sweating, as we discussed in last week's episode, it is just, as I said, it's easy to forget to drink water. I've climbed entire high peaks and never took a single sip of water because it just didn't occur to me. It's as if I literally forgot to hydrate. And then I paid the price later in that hike when I became super dehydrated and my legs started cramping up with every step while I was climbing up Pyramid Peak, while climbing the lower Great Range, many, many miles deep in the backcountry. I believe it was January, maybe February. It was honestly awful. And I started to visualize the map and was starting to plan my bailout route to get out of the woods because it was that bad. But fortunately, I stopped and I drank a lot of water with a lot of electrolytes and salt, and I ate a bunch of food. So after a really rough hour, maybe hour and a half of just crazy cramps every step, my body started to catch back up and I was finally able to finish the day okay. And then it was just yesterday's news as the hike went on, which I was very thankful for, but it was scary and it could have ended significantly worse, no doubt about it. I just literally forgot to drink because I was never sweating. So you must remind yourself in the winter to drink just as much, if not more, water than you would in the summertime, because your body is also working overtime to keep it functioning in those cold, cold temperatures. The colder the temperatures, the harder your body is working. Now, how do we carry water is what you're probably thinking. So let's dive into that. As we all know, water bladders are very popular while hiking, and with good reason. They hold a lot of water. Many backpacks have pockets designed for them, and the tube always puts that delicious H2O mere inches away from our mouth. How convenient. A truly great invention. In the winter, however, bladder hoses tend to freeze quite easily, thus rendering them useless. Some companies do make insulation for bladder hoses to combat that issue, but I personally have yet to find any success with any of them. Though I'm sure others have, and I'm sure there's ones that work, but I haven't personally. So just take my opinion with a grain of salt and experiment for yourself, as I always say. But that's my experience with bladder hose insulation. I have had great success simply packing a few Nalgene or similar 1-liter size bottles, all of which I load up with a couple of Noon tablets, might I add, or just similar electrolyte tablets. In the winter, I want to give myself the best bang for my buck when it comes to my water and my food. So by filling my water bottles with electrolyte tablets, I'm aiding my body the best I can and giving myself the best fighting chance to have a great day. I'll probably mention it again later, but it's important to keep salt packets in your backpack for when you do get dehydrated, because water alone will not solve your problems when you're dehydrated. You also need salt. Now, you may be wondering, but James, won't my Nalgene bottle freeze too? Short answer, yes. Long answer, let me continue. There are many simple hacks and products out there to help keep your water bottles from freezing while out in these sub-zero temperatures. There are Nalgene bottle insulation products that exist, and I even own a couple of them, and they work pretty well. But another easy trick is simply to keep your water bottle inside a spare pair of your wool socks. This hack has served me well and keeps my water from freezing most of the time, just as a good insulating sleeve, This hack has served me and countless other hikers very well, and it keeps the water from freezing most of the time, just as good as those insulating sleeves that Nalgene and other companies make. And you probably have some spare socks at home. In the winter, you will get used to drinking that kind of icy water because, of course, some of the water will always freeze, but typically you can shake it up and break up that ice pretty easily. The next hack that I recommend is keeping those Nalgene bottles upside down in your backpack. Why? Simple. Water freezes at the top first. So if your water bottle is upside down in the side pouches on your backpack, the bottom of the Nalgene bottle will freeze first since it's what's up, thus allowing you to still drink out of the non-frozen top of the Nalgene bottle, which is at the moment on the bottom. Makes sense, right? Science. So just keep them upside down in those sleeves, and then when you open your water bottle to drink out of it, that side of the water bottle will not be frozen. Unless the whole bottle is frozen, but that gives you the most fighting chance. And my final recommendation when it comes to water is to bring a small thermos filled with piping hot water in your backpack. I stole this from Jonathan Zaharik. It's amazing how quickly your water bottle will thaw by just pouring in a few drops of hot water into it when you reach the summit. It works very well. Finally, when it comes to water in the winter, you're typically at the mercy of the water that you brought from home because, of course, most lakes, ponds, and rivers are frozen. Not always. Sometimes you can find a stream that's not frozen and you can get some water, but it's a good rule of thumb to just assume such. Bring more water than you expect to need always, especially in the winter because you're usually not going to have those running bodies of water to fill up on. All right, to sum up our talk on all things H2O, make sure that you are always drinking water because it's easy to just forget when you're not really sweating a lot, so you do not become dehydrated. Water bladders tend to freeze, especially the hose, and Nalgene bottles will need an insulation sleeve of some sort, which a spare wool sock works pretty well to do, or you can buy a product that does it as well for very cheap. And store them in your backpack upside down while hiking to keep the top of the water bottle from freezing. Then if there's time, a thermos of near boiling water can do wonders for you and your crew if your water freezes. And then, of course, those rivers and lakes are usually frozen, so bring a lot of water from home and plan on needing to bring all of your water. All right, now let's move on and talk about food. Food is easy. Protein, carbs, and fats. You know what works for you. Just remember, more is better because your body is working harder in the winter, and it's better to have more if you get caught out there. Make sure you're bringing food that you can eat in the cold as well. And again, this is just personal preferences, but sometimes eating in the cold is actually hard to do because we either just don't want certain foods when it's cold outside or when the actual food itself is cold or frozen. For example, Snickers bars. Now, if you listen to this podcast, you know that I'm a big Snickers guy. Hungry? Why wait? Grab a Snickers. You're not you when you're hungry. This podcast is not sponsored by Snickers, but I would welcome their phone call. Snickers are physically hard to eat when they're frozen. However, I actually enjoy the frozen Snickers because it's definitely a different experience, different texture, and a totally different vibe. But they're physically hard to chew because they're, frozen. Sandwiches are different in the cold too. They hit very differently, but in my opinion, they still hit pretty hard, and they are a staple for when I am hiking. I still abide by my own rule of one sandwich per summit. Sometimes it's peanut butter and jelly, sometimes turkey and ham. Just remember that food is not the same on top of a mountain when it's 0 degrees outside. So choose wisely and think about that when you start to plan what you're going to eat during your winter hikes, because eating is just a different experience in the cold when the food is cold. Just keep it in mind. And here's a pro tip for you. Are you ready? Write this down. Peanut butter M&Ms. Whew! When frozen, they are just absolutely out of this world. They will change your life. And now I'm talking the orange bag, not to be confused with the lesser peanut M&Ms in the yellow bag. Sure, the peanut M&Ms are good, but those peanut butter M&Ms, when frozen, man, you will be glad you have them. They're even better cold, in my opinion. All right, quick sum up of food. Protein, fats, and carbs. Have more food than you expect to have. That's always the case when hiking, but especially in the winter. Make sure you think about what works for you in terms of food that you actually will want to eat when it's freezing cold, be it the food or the temperatures. So you have to kind of experiment a little bit. Sometimes the food you eat in the winter won't change at all from the summer. And then I know some people who eat completely different food in the winter because they just don't feel like eating certain foods when it's freezing cold. Keep it in mind. Moving on, as we continue today's episode about everything that goes inside your backpack, I do want to discuss one thing that I dubbed to put in this episode, even though it technically will go on your backpack, but for lack of a better word, we'll just call it in your backpack, and that is the ice axe. Now, the ice axe is a non-essential, but it comes in handy in specific conditions on specific days in specific circumstances, kind of like what I talked about last week when it comes to the crampons. Sometimes you need them, very specific situations, but you can easily get away without them. So I feel the same way about the ice axe. I get a lot of people asking me if it's a necessity, and I feel personally that it is not essential, so you don't have to feel like you have to own one. They are designed for ice climbing, and yes, in the winter, in some sections here in the Adirondacks, you are climbing some icy slabs, and the axe is a welcomed tool. Plus, they can come in useful for other things as well. If you're climbing up slides or you're climbing up slabs, it's likely that they will be useful and they will be helpful. But if you're hiking up a typical trail, you never really will use it. There are also attachments that some trekking poles have where you can get a small axe to put on top of it. But again, that's a specific product. But I felt it was necessary to touch on this subject because, again, I get a lot of questions from people asking about if they need a winter axe. And I do not feel it is an essential item. It is, once again, an item that is useful in certain circumstances, but do not feel like you can not go winter hiking if you do not have an ice axe. You could easily go a whole winter hiking career and never really use it if you go on the right days. But again, it will be useful in some situations. It's also kind of one of those items that maybe it's nice to have a friend who has the ice axe. But anyways, okay, this is a good place to remind you all that micro spikes are an absolute must-have in your backpack at all times. And no, yak tracks are not micro spikes. And snowshoes are also required when the snowdrift is over 8 inches in the Adirondack High Peaks Wilderness, which is basically from November to April in the ADK. This is something that needs to be hammered home and was worth mentioning a second time, even though we talked about it last episode. And again, all of those things can be rented for nice affordable prices at EMS and REI and probably any other local shop. Next, as we go deeper into your backpack, as I mentioned previously, you want to have your clothing needs, a mid-layer to hike in, a puffy mid-layer, and an outer layer along with spare socks, and if you can, a spare set of base layers. But now we will talk about the other essentials to have inside your backpack. Yup, we're talking the 10 essentials, summer or winter, but these are called essentials for a reason. Now, I know most of you are aware of the phrase, the 10 essentials, though I'm going to be honest with you. I am willing to bet 90% of hikers who berate people on social media about being prepared probably can't actually list all 10 essentials without looking. But anyways, if you're one of those people, take a chill pill. Write this down. Now you'll know. The official 10 essentials list as follows, and these should all be inside your backpack, whether summer or winter, but they are so crucial for the winter. Here we go. 1. Navigation. 2. Headlamp. 3. Sun protection. 4. First aid. 5. Knife. 6. Fire. 7. Shelter. 8. Extra food. 9. Extra water. And 10. Extra clothes. All right, so let's dive into each of those items and talk a little bit about each one. Starting with number 1, navigation. So that's your map, that's your compass, that's your GPS. And since a lot of people are using, cell phone app, GPS units, all the different apps that come out there, All Trails, and I think Gaia is another one that's called. But I personally have a Garmin GPS, and I highly recommend them. They are very expensive. It's like $400, maybe even a little more. But my God, they are when you're out as much as I guess I go out, or I just feel like it's one of those items where it is a game changer. It's a life insurance policy because it also has an SOS button. It's a really foolproof GPS. The battery not being charged out in the freezing cold, it will last for days. So that's great. But since people mostly do use their phone these days, and I'm not stupid and I understand that that's what they use, I would like to add to this navigation item to have an additional battery and a cell phone charger with you. You all, know how cell phones work. They die in the cold. This is a good time to just bring an extra battery to charge that cell phone, or charge your GPS too if that's what you have. And then, of course, the phone charger to charge your phone. Whether you are in an emergency situation, you need to call for help, or, you need to use it to get out of the woods, that's good to have. And, you need to have that extra battery. So keep that in mind. But then also there's your map, there's your compass. You got to know how to use the map and compass. I also, going along with my comment before about people not actually knowing the 10 essentials, can't tell you how many people I've talked to about map and compass who berate people on social media, and then I can tell that they actually wouldn't really know how to use a compass to get out of the woods if they were in trouble. So again, these are skill sets, and these are skills that you can learn. You can take it upon yourself to learn more about navigation. It's really good to know, obviously, especially in the winter. Again, in the summer, you can see the trail. In the winter, that's really not always the case. So a lot of times you will need to know how to travel to get back to somewhere in terms of direction. So navigation, very important. Map, compass, GPS, and then an additional battery and cell phone charger. Number 2, your headlamp. So pretty self-explanatory. Plus extra batteries. Again, headlamps die. Although personally, I like having 2 headlamps with batteries. So I bring the extra batteries, but I also have just an entire second headlamp because, again, if your headlamp dies, it just becomes faulty. It doesn't work. It breaks. That dies. It's a lot nicer to just grab the other headlamp in your pack than to look for batteries, take the batteries out of your headlamp, all of this being done in the dark. It's better to just have 2 headlamps. They're super inexpensive. And honestly, even a $10 headlamp is way better than a $0 headlamp. So, grab that. I like to have 2 headlamps. I think it's a crucial item to have. And again, small, take up no space, and very minimal price. Number 3, sun protection. We're talking sunglasses. We're talking sun protective clothing, and we're talking sunscreen. Yeah, you can still get sunburn in the winter. You know that. Number 4, first aid, including Band-Aids, bandages, foot care. You don't really need bug spray in the winter, thank the Lord. But, Band-Aids, bandages, stuff for, help your feet. You can get blisters, all sorts of things like that. Typical first aid. And again, that's going to differ for each person. And one recommendation here is know what you have. You can buy these first aid kits, of course. Know what you have and know what times and when you would use what's in these first aid kits. And of course, YouTube University is a great place to start with these sorts of things, but it's better to know ahead of time what you have and how you will use it in what circumstances before you are in those circumstances, especially when you're in the winter and, oh, great, now I'm not moving. Now I'm freezing cold. It's hard to think when you're really cold. So just something to be aware of. Number 5 on the 10 essentials list, a knife. I mean, I don't need to go through a knife, why a knife is important when you're out there. It's good to have it. Be prepared. Have a knife. Number 6, fire, matches, preferably waterproof matches, and a lighter. A Bic lighter, even when a little wet, it's crazy. They're magic. They just always work. So make sure you have multiple fire sources, waterproof matches, and a Bic lighter, maybe 2. They weigh nothing. They cost 98 cents. Why not? 2's better than 1, right? And these should be kept in a waterproof Ziploc bag or a container of some sort, And then I also recommend cotton balls soaked in petroleum jelly, which will help you get a fire started very quickly. Obviously, starting a fire in the winter requires a whole other set of skills, but those are quick, easy things that, again, don't weigh anything and takes 2 seconds to just grab some cotton balls and soak them in petroleum jelly and throw them in a plastic bag and put them in your little fire starter kit. Another item, a shout out to a company called Bigfoot Bushcraft. You all know I'm a Bigfoot guy, but Bigfoot Bushcraft also have items that I have with me in my pack when I'm hiking, when I'm hunting, and I even use them occasionally just at home when I'm quickly starting a fire. They're just really good little fire starters. You just basically break them in half, and then the fibers in them, you light the fibers, and they start up. They're great. Bigfoot Bushcraft. No, I'm not sponsored by anything. I just have used them and used them with great success. All right, moving on from fire. Obviously, fire keeps you warm. Fire will potentially save your life, especially in the winter. And yes, you can have fires in the winter. Obviously, be mindful of the fire that you're building if you're in an emergency situation. But obviously that it's better for you to survive the night here, so you will have to likely start a fire if you get caught out there in the middle of the night. Number 7, shelter. An emergency space blanket, a bivy sack, and a sash to tie up a shelter. Now, this is something that I always also keep in my backpack, summer or winter, but having a bivy sack, and you can get these very small, break down to be very small bivy sacks, not necessarily designed for once you take them out. They're not designed necessarily to put them back into the little bags they come in, but they break down to, next to nothing. So having a bivy sack, which is basically like a space blanket sleeping bag, and it reflects heat. So when you're inside of it, the heat that comes off of you reflects back onto you. So it just helps to warm up. It is by no means a sleeping bag, but it will help you survive the night. And then an emergency space blanket, which again breaks down super small. These space blankets reflect heat and reflect light as well. Now, sash to tie up a shelter. So you can just make a quick, rain fly style shelter, which when you're out there in the winter, you're out there overnight to keep the elements off of you. I mean, it will be an enormous benefit to have those. And again, those are super lightweight, and being able to quickly make a little shelter if you get caught out there and you have to stay the night will be very, very important. All right, moving on. Number 8, extra food beyond your minimum expectation of food that you'll want. Pretty self-explanatory. Number 9, extra water. Good thing we just started talking about these things. And then number 10, as I mentioned, some extra clothes beyond what you expect to need. That's where I mentioned the additional base layers. Oof, it can be really, really nice to have those when you're out there. So that's the 10 essentials one more time. Navigation, headlamp, sun protection, first aid, knife, fire, shelter, extra food, extra water, and number 10, extra clothes. All right, now for the Appleton's honorable mentions that are essential in my own personal opinion. Number 11, zip ties. Zip ties are so freaking clutch in a pinch to fix things like broken snowshoes or a broken backpack or a broken tent or anything. Zip ties, they're freaking great. I've used them so many times and been so happy that I have them in my backpack. Broken boot also, I've used a zip tie as a shoelace before. Speaking of shoelaces, honorable mention number 12. Bring some spare shoelaces. I once broke my bootlace in the middle of a hike in the Santanoni Range, and it is a miserable time finishing out the day with one boot basically just not tied. So spend the 98 cents to have a spare pair of shoelaces in your pack. And they can also be used to tie an emergency shelter up, in those situations, so they can pull double duty. Duct tape. If you can't duck it, yeah, you know the saying. It fixes everything. Just take an old credit card and wrap a few layers of duct tape around that credit card and save space and just toss it in your backpack. Really nice to have. Once again, when you need some duct tape, you will be happy that this is in your backpack. And finally, honorable mention number 4, taking us to 14, hand warmers. Bring a few hand warmers. They can be a real lifesaver in the winter, and they're worth having in there. They don't weigh a lot. Those days where it's really cold, or maybe you get wet and you need those hand warmers, have them in there. And also, too, when it comes to, things like hypothermia, but we'll get into that in the next episode, but when it comes to things like hypothermia, or you get wet and you need to warm someone up, hand warmers, under the armpits, between the legs, in those types of places, they're very necessary. But we'll dive deeper into that in the next episode. But again, hand warmers are something that are very important to have in your backpack for both warming up the hands and then other more survival-y type of reasons. So to recap, the 10 essentials, they are truly essential to have in your backpack during a winter hike, as winter day hikes can turn into overnight hikes when things go wrong, and it is so crucial to have what you need to survive the night. Yes, I said to survive the night, or maybe even longer. This is serious business. Once again, climbing mountains in the dead of winter, miles from anywhere, it is to be taken seriously, and the mountains do not care about your fragile feelings. The mountains are to be respected, and they are to be taken very, very seriously. I can't stress that enough. I get it so often. I see in the comments people getting upset about people suggesting certain things. Dude, when it comes to the winter, I don't care about your feelings. I don't care about this. I don't care about that. This is serious. This is the winter. This is not, the summertime where the temperature gets down to, 40 degrees at night and it's cold, but you'll be fine. This is a different animal. Winter hiking is not for everybody. It just isn't. If you're not going to take it seriously, you're not going to prepare, you're not going to get the equipment you need, you're not going to have the proper things, just wait until summertime to go hiking, because winter is a different thing. You have to be mentally prepared, physically prepared, and you got to have the gear and be ready to use it. Moving on. Now that I've touched on what to have with you, what to have on you, and what to do before you arrive at the trailhead, now we're ready to finally talk about the actual hike. Now remember, when the hike begins, we want to be bold and start cold. Meaning you should be cold when you're in the parking lot wearing at most, a single mid-layer and maybe a shell, depending on how much snow is coming down. You should really be kind of itching to start moving, like when you're at the trailhead and you're waiting for your buddy to hurry up and be ready, you should kind of be like doing like the dance, like when you have to pee and you're just moving around, to keep warm. That's the temperature you should be before you guys actually start hiking. If you can just stand there and hang out and chill and everything's cool, you're probably dressed too warm and you'll probably end up needing to take some layers off very quickly. So you want to be bold and start cold. So let's talk about the actual hiking experience. When hiking in general, and even more so here in the winter, it is crucial to keep an eye on those weather conditions, as unexpected storms can move in within a mere minutes, regardless of what the weather forecast suggested. Anyone who has hiked for a long period of time has had days where they have had to turn around and go back due to worsening weather. And I'm not just talking about, oh, it's raining now, let's turn around. No, I'm talking actual dangerous storms. Rain is okay because rain, we put our rain gear on. We keep going. We are in the great outdoors, people. We are there to experience the outdoors, and rain is a part of that. I'm talking when dangerous storms come in. So you have to always be willing to call it quits and come back another day. And as the saying goes, there's always next time. These mountains are not going anywhere. And speaking of turning around, I should have mentioned this earlier in the episode, but before you even leave the house, before you go hiking, just make sure you left a note with a loved one so they know where you're going, where you're hiking, what mountains you're planning to hike, what trailhead you're hiking from, because in an emergency situation, People will need to be able to find you and be able to report, hey, he or she is not back yet. This is a problem, and be able to direct the rangers and direct, the 911 people where you are and where they think you are. So always leave a note with people to let them know where you're going. Doesn't matter who, but let people know. As I mentioned in the food section, you want to drink water and you want to eat often. Even if you have to remind yourself to do so, just do it. Don't be afraid to take more than usual pit stops to rest as well. And every time you do take a pit stop, take some drinks, take a couple bites of something, get that food in you, keep your body churning and burning, and you'll be very glad you did, and then you'll do everything you can to avoid cramping up. As I mentioned before, cramping up in the wintertime, it's scary and it's bad. It's not good. So, if you got to remind yourself to eat and drink, do it, and do it often. So as you're hiking, throughout the day, you'll constantly be adding and removing layers to regulate your body temperature and keep it from overheating and keep it from sweating as much as possible. Being wet from sweat can and does lead to hypothermia. And some quick tips for the layering process while you're actually hiking. So let's say you're hiking in a mid layer and you have it, you have your hat, gloves, mid layer on, you're hiking, you're like, oh man, I'm getting a little hot now. Okay, unzip your coat. There's a quick way to get some cool air and just continue to regulate your body temperature. Maybe you don't need to take the mid layer off, but just unzip it. Okay, here's another quick way. Take your hat off. I rarely have a hat on when I'm hiking. Actually, I always have a hat on when I'm hiking in the summer. I rarely have one on when I'm hiking in the winter. The hat is the quickest way to quickly cool down or to quickly warm up when you're out there. So take your hat off. Sometimes you're not wearing big gloves and you're just wearing little glove liners while you're hiking, to again regulate your temperature to keep you cool. You don't want to sweat. You want to be as comfortable as possible. So throughout the day, you're constantly taking layers off, putting layers on. Oh, now we're higher up in elevation. It's actually colder. Now I need to put the hat on, or now I need to put the other gloves on. Now I need to zip up my mid layer, or I might need a thicker mid layer because it's colder now up here, or now I need to put the shell on. And now it's a little hot again. I'm going to take this off again, put it back in my backpack. So throughout the day, you are just always adding, removing layers. As you get higher, it gets colder, of course, and sometimes the conditions worsen as you get higher, so you're going to always be doing that. So just be aware that you are always constantly adding and removing layers, and just be willing to do it. Winter hiking, and again, is not a one-size-fits-all in terms of what you're wearing. Like in the summertime, you don't change anything. This is a different animal. Another thing to be mindful of while you're hiking is what time is it? Be aware it will take you just as long to get back to the trailhead as it did to get to your current location, so just be mindful of that. If the day starts to get away from you, things are moving slower than you expected, sometimes you do have to just turn around. Always be willing to turn around. Nothing is worth your life. Nothing is worth getting into an emergency situation. Those mountains, again, they're not going anywhere. Now let's talk about cell phones for a hot second. A good practice is to turn your cell phones either completely off, spare that battery, or put them on airplane mode at the very minimum to conserve your battery. Apps like AllTrails and similar GPS apps, there are indeed great tools to help you know where you are and to make sure that you're still on trail, especially in the winter. But, take this information with a grain of salt and refer to your map as well. AllTrails works very well along with your map. I don't recommend just using AllTrails, but when you want to use it as an additional tool along with your map, fantastic. And I don't care what anyone says. It is a fantastic thing to do. These two work very well when used in conjunction with one another. Oh, and one other thing. Your flashlight on your cell phone, however, that does not count as a light source and it should not be used as one. Use the flashlight that you brought with you, that headlamp, remember? Maybe you even brought two. But don't use your flashlight. Talk about killing the battery on your phone really fast, especially out in the freezing cold. And you'll want to have that extra battery to charge your cell phone along with the cell phone charging cable. So while you're hiking, you want to stay on the trail the best you can. And remember, the footsteps that you're following don't always mean you're on the correct path to the summit. You don't know who broke out the trail before you or where they were going or even if they were on the trail themselves anymore. So always be aware that that's a possibility. And I understand it's hard to know that, but that's where those GPS units are pretty helpful to verify that you're actually traveling on the correct trail. In the wintertime, the woods can look very similar, and like because there's no leaves on the trees, you could kind of visualize a trail through the woods pretty easily. So it can be very easy to lose the actual trail. And who knows if the people before you did that. Maybe they lost the actual trail. Just another thing to just be aware of, just be mindful of. Now, I mentioned this during the snowshoe section, but I'll run through it again. Wearing traction on your feet, be it snowshoes or micro spikes, it is a necessity. It keeps the trails in better shape. It keeps them safer because post holing creates a trail filled with ankle-breaking holes when those deep post hole-like footsteps end up freezing over. Plus, snowshoes, though somewhat awkward at first, actually make your hike physically easier. They're better for you. They make things easier to do. You have traction. You can actually just walk. And, when you're walking in like powder and snow, every step by stepping in, a couple inches, like it's physically more difficult. Whereas the snowshoes, it's actually easier despite it kind of being somewhat awkward. Oh, and soon you really like the snowshoes. And sometimes you end up putting them on right at the beginning, whether you need them or not. Now, some quick hiking trail etiquette worth mentioning, just since we're talking about the actual hiking experience now, is that the people coming up the mountain have the right of way. So when they're coming up and you're coming down and you pass, step aside and let the people coming up go past you and offer them a friendly hello. Don't be afraid. Look at each other and say hello. How's your day going? It is so freaking weird when people don't acknowledge one another. You just pretend like you're not there. It is so awkward and strange. A friendly hello is always the right thing to do. You don't have to stop and have a conversation, but look at each other, offer them a hello, offer them a, hey, have a nice day. That is better than just pretending you don't exist. That is weird. Stop doing it. And if you want to turn the podcast off now, fine. But I stand by my thought process on that. Next, in the high peaks especially, as well as most outdoors areas, you'll find yourself crossing over bodies of water, be it river streams or lakes and ponds. Always be careful. Ice that holds snow may not necessarily hold the weight of a person, so move with caution and just, check the ice thickness before traveling across it. Avoid ice over running water, and a lot of times you can hear the river running underneath the ice, so just be mindful, be careful. Don't just willy-nilly go across it. Sometimes you can get across it without any issue, but just be aware. Be aware. Make good decisions. And this is another time, again, where the mountains, they don't care about you and they can easily kill you if you don't respect them. I don't know if I've mentioned yet in this podcast that the mountains don't care about you. Something to keep in mind. We care about them. Man, do we care about them. But they do not care about us, and that's the way it should be. We need to respect them. So to sum up the actual winter hiking experience, I talked about a lot, but always be mindful of the weather and be ready to turn back if you need to. Be bold and start cold so you don't overheat right from the start. Dial in your layering needs so that you can self-regulate your body temperature throughout the hike. Layers on, layers off constantly. Being wet from a river or from sweat can quickly lead to hypothermia. Eat food and drink water often. Conserve your cell phone batteries by turning it off or putting it on airplane mode. And yes, your favorite GPS cell phone app that's tracking your hike will indeed still work well on airplane mode. In fact, it will work better because your phone won't be using as much battery. Stay on the trails, wear your snowshoes and your micro spikes, and be mindful of water crossings as they can be somewhat deceiving. Now, because I'm a very visual person by nature and I like seeing someone do something, I'm going to paint a quick visual of a typical winter hiking workflow for any of you who've never hiked in the winter, just to see what it looks like, just to see with all these things I've been talking about and see them in action. And of course, since this is a podcast, by the word see, I mean hear. And because I like to tell stories on this podcast, so I'm going to create a hiking vibe for you right now. So here we go. It's 3 a.m. Your alarm clock goes off. You're either filled with childlike excitement on Christmas morning, excited for your winter hike, or you're filled with rage that burns hotter than the depths of hell as you wonder to yourself, why am I going outside in the cold right now? Nobody's making me go climb a mountain in the snow. What am I doing? This bed, it's so cozy all of a sudden. I never realized how warm it is. But you muscle up the courage and you roll out of bed anyways and you get ready to go. You put on your base layers, you grab your backpack, which you packed the night before, and you go start your car to warm it up. Only 20 degrees out here, not too bad. But I guess if that means 20 degrees out here, it might be probably about 0 degrees on the summit. Okay. You then throw your enormous amount of food and at least 3 liters of water into your backpack with the water bottles in a wool sock upside down in your backpack sleeves, of course. Fresh batteries in your headlamp, map in your backpack, 10 essentials dialed in, micro spikes in your pack with snowshoes attached, extra hat and gloves, and you are ready to go. But not before you leave a note with someone at home letting them know where you're hiking that day, which mountains, trails, and from which trailhead, of course. Now you're ready to brave that cold walk from your front door to your car door. You get in your car wearing a base layer, your mid layer, hiking pants, and of course, your Crocs. You throw your boots and your backpack in the back of your car, and you pull out of your driveway, only to realize, crap, I forgot my trekking poles. You reluctantly turn around and go back to get them because, yes, they are that important. All right, trekking poles are here. Now it's go time as you embark on a quiet, middle-of-the-night drive north to the Adirondack trailhead destination of your choice. You pull up to the trailhead. It's dark out. You're enjoying sitting in your warm car as you wait for your hiking partner to arrive, but you also remember that some Adirondack podcaster always tells you miles in the dark don't count. So in an effort to get as many miles in the dark before the sun rises, you turn your car off only to immediately notice, man, it's really cold already. And as you get out of your car, your friend pulls into the trailhead. You connect eyes with a friendly nod as he or she parks their car, only to immediately get out of their car and offer you what feels like the loudest middle-of-the-night greeting the world has ever heard. A good morning. That feels like it's so loud it's going to wake up the neighbors 10 miles away. Chill, dude, chill. Good morning. Don't yell. The night air is soft and quiet at that hour. You pop on your puffy coat as you get out of your car, slip off those crazy comfortable Crocs, and slip on your also comfortable waterproof hiking boots, and you suit up for your hike. All right, you are ready to start hiking. Hat on, gloves on, headlamp on, micro spikes on, puffy coat off. Yes, you'll be cold, all right. That's the point. Maybe you'll wear a light fleece mid-layer to start as you throw your backpack on, sign into the trailhead, and start hiking. Here we go. The bottom of the trail is well broken out, so no snowshoes necessary to start as your micro spikes crunch along the snow-covered sidewalk-like trail. It's going to be a great day. And as you start to move, you warm right up, but you're already starting to get warm. Of course, that mid-layer fleece I had on is zipped up. Time to cool down. So in an effort to keep moving, you simply unzip your jacket to regulate your body temperature and let some air flow. Much better. You also take your hat off because it's the quickest way to cool down or warm up. The fresh, cold mountain night air feels oh so nice on your scalp. You and your hiking partner continue walking, and the joy of climbing mountains and the adventure that is underway is in full effect. You get a few miles in as first light starts to break while your headlamps light up the quiet and still forest floor. You're comfortable because you dressed a little cold this morning, knowing that with the physical movement that comes with climbing mountains that you'll warm right up, and you were right. After gaining some good elevation, you're a little warm again, and you decide to take off that mid-layer fleece altogether to avoid sweating even more. So you decide to make a quick pit stop, take off that mid-layer, take a swig of water and a quick bite of some food, and then you're right back to it. And then a couple miles later, your ears get a little cold, so back on goes your hat. Your hands are starting to get a little cold, though, as the elevation increases because you've only been hiking in your liner gloves so far. So on go the real gloves. Perfect. Warming those fingers right up. So you've been on the trail for a couple hours at this point, and it's a good time for a Snickers break. I mean a snack break. So you stop on the side of the trail, and off comes the backpack once again, as the cold winter air hits your somewhat yet often unavoidably sweaty back. Oh, it's so cold. But nothing a king-size Snickers bar can't fix, right? At least emotionally, and somewhat physically. You eat some food and drink some water. This pit stop isn't too long, so there wasn't any need to put on the puffy during this snack break and throw your backpack back on and you continue hiking up the mountain. You keep climbing up and you start to get some distant views of the snow-capped mountains all around you as the sun starts to rise. It's beautiful and it sets just an amazing vibe in the woods. Meanwhile, the maroon and orange sunrise between the mountains in the distance lights up the entire sky, and you think to yourself, it's crazy that most people will never experience this. It is unbelievable. Through your research, you learned it was going to be a partly cloudy day with some snow flurries expected, but it's going to be an amazing morning in the mountains. And so far that day, the trail has been pretty broken out and easy to follow with minimal fresh snow this past week, which you also learned by researching for the snowfall the week leading up to your hike. But now as the elevation continues, so does the snowfall, which you're prepared for. So it's about that time to stop and switch up your gear once again. With another stop, though, comes another water and food break. Oh, it's a bit colder up here, though. Time to throw on the puffy jacket during this rest stop. Food tastes really good at this point, too, especially those frozen peanut butter M&Ms in your trail mix. The snow starts to pick up, so it's probably time to toss on that top layer rain shell over your mid layer because it's colder now, too. It's also time to switch out the micro spikes for your snowshoes. All right, you're layered up, ready for the elements, snowshoes on. Let's continue. Onward up the trail. You look around the woods. Now, where is the trail? Ah, yes, the higher the elevation, the more wind, and the more snowfall means the often broken out trail ceases to be broken out anymore. Time to break some trail. But good thing you deployed those snowshoes. The trail is somewhat visible, and you can see the break in the trees well enough to follow up where the trail is. Occasionally, you use your GPS to verify that you are indeed still on the trail and continuing to make your way towards the summit. You're almost there, and you're about to break the tree line and head up the exposed rocks to the exposed summit where the views will be magnificent. So now is a good time to layer up even more for that summit approach. And with every stop, though, comes a swig and a snack. So before layering up, it's time to fuel up, take a bite, take a drink, get ready. And at this point, depending how cold it is and how far you have to hike up to the true summit, and how sweaty you are, now may be an appropriate time to put on your puffy coat underneath your top layer to hike up to the summit. And of course, today there's wind and a lot of snowfall, so the top layer is appropriate. So out onto the exposed rocks you go. The wind is whipping, but it's not too bad. You've experienced worse. No need for the ski goggles today. And before you know it, you start to turn around and you see those summit views all around as the high peaks tower in the sky, covered in Dr. Seuss-like snow as the winter world around you feels like you're on a different planet. A few more steps with the snowshoes and you're at the summit. You made it. It was tough, but suddenly you don't remember any of the bad and only remember the good and glorious moments. You've reached a place in a time of year that most humans will only experience through photographs, but you're standing there in the thick of it, and you earned it every step. You climbed the mountain, you regulated your body temperature the best you could by taking layers off and putting layers on. Your body feels pretty good. You ate enough food, you drank enough, you had the gear to get there, and now you can enjoy the majesty of the mountains as you enjoy your first of multiple summit sandwiches for the day. On to the next mountain you go. Your magical winter adventure continues. Well, that's going to wrap up part 2 of this 3-part Winter Hiking 101 series. Remember the water tricks, have the proper food that you'll eat when cold, and keep those 10 essentials and the honorable mentions with you when you're out there in the woods. They could be the difference between life and death. I hope you take this information to heart and apply it to the next time you're out on your winter mountain adventure. Next week, I'll talk all things emergencies such as avalanche safety, hypothermia, frostbite, unexpected overnights, and more. If you like the podcast, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Then head over to 46of46.com for more information on the podcast. There's a blog. You can check out my 20,000-word ebook, Guide to Climbing the 46 High Peaks if you're into that, and much more. Part 3 of the winter hiking series drops next Friday. I'll see you guys then. Remember to always leave no trace, do the rock walk, and if you carry it in, carry it out. See you on the trails, everybody.